Yeah, like with the community hangouts, I kind of make it unlisted, and it's kind of just more of like recording. Then later, I'll edit it. But usually, the edit too is just it's more string of consciousness kind of stuff. So I let it I just mainly clean up the audio, like background noise and all that kind of stuff. We also do like shows where they're more focused, where they have like a guest or an idea that is centered around. But like community hangouts is exactly kind of like the Pirate Radio After Hours, which is more kind of like, oh, let's just like hang out and see what people are thinking, and like a brainstorming session for other projects. Like Missy's working on something that's kind of interesting that it'll be interesting to bring up and see what Dream Eater thinks about it and stuff like that. So like we're always constantly like talking to each other, but it's always better when you're like voice to voice, you know, a lot better. Hold on, Dream Eater.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, I'm back. Okay, I'm back.
Tonight I can write the saddest lines, by Pablo Neruda. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. Write, for example, the night is starry and the stars are blue and shiver in the distance. The night wind revolves in the sky and sings. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. I loved her, and sometimes she loved me too. Through nights like this one I held her in my arms. I kissed her again and again under the endless sky. She loved me. Sometimes I loved her too. How could one not have loved her great still eyes? Tonight I can write the saddest lines. To think that I do not have her. To feel that I have lost her. To hear the immense night still more immense without her. And the verse falls to the soul like dew to the pasture. What does it matter that my love could not keep her? The night is starry and she is not with me. This is all. In the distance, someone is singing. In the distance. My soul is not satisfied that it has lost her. My sight tries to find her, as though to bring her closer. My heart looks for her, and she is not with me. The same night, whitening the same trees. We of that time are no longer the same. I no longer love her, that's certain, but how I loved her. My voice tries to find the wind, to touch her hearing. And others, she will be in others, as she was before my kisses. Her voice, her bright body, her infinite eyes. I no longer love her, that's certain, but maybe I love her. Love is so short, forgetting is so long, because through nights like this one, I held her in my arms. My soul is not satisfied that it has lost her, though this be the last pain that she makes me suffer, and these the last verses that I write for her.
Decorate and
Oh, you're doing it all at once.
I'm doing it all at once.
How's the weather over there?
We had it was my birthday on the 26th of May, and we had this really
Happy
super.
birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, there you are.
I went to see Russell Brand a couple of nights ago. He was amazing.
You saw Russell Brand?
We act out stories. That's why we tell stories, right? That's why people are attracted to stories, because stories are the best way of describing our lives. And stories have a pattern, or they wouldn't be stories. I mean, that's why there's comedy, right? That's where everything turns out the way everyone wants it to. That's why there's tragedy, when everything falls apart. That's why there's adventure and romance. And that covers a lot of territory, right? Adventure, romance, comedy, tragedy. And people like Carl Jung in particular, he was the deepest analyst of stories, I would say. There's a Romanian guy named Mircea Eliade, who was also a very historian of religions. He was also a very remarkable scholar and very useful if you're interested in understanding the fundamental patterns of stories. But Jung was very interested in the deepest structure of stories. Imagine that humans have languages. Every human culture has a language. But languages have a commonality, right? They're all languages, and they have a universal grammar. That was Noam Chomsky's great discovery.
Yes.
And stories are like that. Every culture has its own stories, but the stories have a universal grammar. And so Jung was the first person who laid the groundwork for discovering what that universal grammar was. And it's crucially important work. You could say that what a religion is a set of stories that comes very close to the grammar of stories. They aren't stories that you can dispense with. The hero story is like that.
Jung, you say, did great early work in mapping out what might be the etymology or the sort of the ulterior truth from which these patterns emerge.
Yep.
My interest in this is that because when Jung works with image and mandala in, say, for example, the Red Book, what is suggested by our ability to observe patterns and the fact that we respond to patterns is that there is some kind of universal frequency. Is that there is some kind of universal frequency. Is that there is some kind of universal frequency that we are responding to.
Well, I had two clients who knew nothing about Jungian psychotherapy, both of whom were badly fragmented. They were both women. They both had, I would say, variants of post-traumatic stress disorder. They had other problems as well. And both of them produced spontaneous drawings that were first very fragmented and disorganized. And then as they put themselves together and were ordering themselves, let's say, they produced drawings that were increasingly symmetrical and regular and took on the mandala-like configurations that Jung described. And so that was absolutely fascinating to watch that. And he thought of those patterns as manifestations of spontaneous order. And you see them in cathedrals.
Yes.
The great rose windows in cathedrals are mandalas. And the rose windows and the entire cathedral structure is something like, it's hard to describe exactly, but a cathedral is something like the optimal balance of structure and light. It's something like that. And the Gothic cathedrals are also reminiscent of forests, right, with their arching branches and the lights coming through, like the light coming through the leaves. It's reminiscent of that. But there's something about the cathedral that expresses the idea of perfect structure, and there's something about a mandala that expresses that, and something about music that expresses that as well. And they're all ways of trying to symbolically represent how things could be if they were put in the proper state of balance. Harmony. Harmony is the right way of thinking.
Harmony.
Space has vanished. Ours is a brand new world of all at once.
The city closest to where I live is about, it would be about a 20-minute drive for me to get there.
I don't think I would stalk many people to have a conversation with, but he might be one person I might actually stalk to have a conversation
He
with.
was amazing, but they had such strict security where I went to see him that there
He's
was
very
no way
well
I could
protected.
film.
Yeah.
I know, I couldn't have filmed. I was going to get my old camera out and film the whole thing. And I thought I'll suss it out when I get in there, and then I thought there's absolutely no way. The minute I got a phone out, there would have been so much CCTV, they would have seen me and they would have removed me immediately. A couple of people did try and they got escorted out of the place.
I suppose all of these forms, the idea that there could perhaps be across the various disciplines, strata and forms of expression, some kind of golden rule, seem to infer a oneness, a truth that in earlier forms of language may be expressed as the idea of God, wholeness, oneness. Where do you stand on the? Do you believe in God?
Well, the Jungian idea is that there's not much distinction between what Jung described as the archetype of the self and the idea of God. Mm. And the self would be something like the totality of your being across time. Jung thought of Christ as a symbol of the self. And the reason for it's a very profound idea. It's an amazingly profound idea.
Go on, unpack that a bit.
Well, if you think about the story of Christ from a psychological perspective, and you strip it down to its essence, what you essentially see is that the story of Christ is the ultimate tragedy. And the reason for that is that the ultimate tragedy is the worst possible thing happening to the best possible person. Right? That's the ultimate tragedy. That's what makes it an archetype. You can't go past that for tragedy. So it's an innocent man who is completely sinless, who is working on behalf of only the good and the truth, broken and destroyed, early and young, and betrayed as well. So that's the ultimate tragedy. And so then there's a comedic element to it in the technical sense, because a comedy has a happy ending.
Technically, wouldn't it require a flaw? You know, like for it to work comedically, there would need to be a flaw in Christ. Is it that he is God made flesh? Is that the flaw?
Well, it depends on what you mean by comedy. I mean, we tend to, as modern people, to think of comedy as something that's humorous, but technically, if you're looking at story structure, a comedy is just a story that has a happy ending, right? That has a positive ending. And
that's
of course,
cool.
It's the resurrection story that makes Christ's story a comedy.
Ta-da!
Exactly. It's like, yeah, this went so badly wrong, but there's this possibility of resurrection. And the way that I read that psychologically, and I'm not trying to make any comments about the metaphysics of it, is that there's a part of people that's the self, the Jungian self, let's say.
The capital S self.
The capital S self, yes. That is capable of sustaining itself across successive deaths and rebirths. And everyone really understands this. It's one of the things that's most fun to teach people, because...
Now let me tell you about Harry. Harry was the only boy in his school with his jeans baggy, hair nappy, hair khakis. He used to skateboard and smoke backy. Girls used to say, why is Harry so unhappy? But he wasn't unhappy, he was just Harry. Happy to chill and smoke weed in the alley. In the valley, Harry told his friends he'd never marry. No girls ever connect with him. They never see interesting, they never interested. And all the girls in the school were so stuck up, so caught up in materialist fucked up. He said one night he would search the world's end to find a down-to-earth intelligent girlfriend. Next day he was in the library, checking out the X-Men comics when his eyes to meet with the most beautiful woman that he could ever dream of. All he had to do was just speak to her.
You know, when you're moving through life and you have a plan or a dream and it shatters, you know, someone dies or a relationship breaks apart, or you have a terrible upset in your career, or you become ill in some unexpected way, then everything around you falls apart and you plunge into a chaotic underworld.
The belly of the whale.
That's exactly right. Yes, exactly that. And then maybe you stay there, because it isn't necessarily the case that people get out. You know, people die. People are in despair permanently. But frequently, something tragic and terrible befalls you, and you fall apart, and you learn something profound as a consequence, and you put yourself back together, and when you come back out, you're more than you were when you went in. And that's happening at a small scale. Every time you learn something, you know, if you ever really learn something, it's usually painful. It usually means that you have to recognize that you're wrong in some important way. You have to let that part of you that's wrong die. And then you have to let a new part of you. Okay, so the self, imagine that you undergo a series of transformations in your life. There are collapses into the chaotic underworld, and then mini resurrections. That happens continually. And that's what molds your character.
Yes.
The self is this thing that manages the transformations that manages all those transformations. So you could say, here's another way of thinking about it. You could identify with what you understand. That's what ideologues do. Huh. You could identify with what you don't understand, and that's what sort of seekers after truth identify with. Or you could identify with the process of moving between those states. You know, sometimes you know what you're doing, you know where you are, you're in control. And you could become arrogant and identify with that, and then become too static about it, right? Or you can be in despair and everything is chaotic and you can identify with that, in which case you're nihilistic. Or you can view yourself as the thing that moves across the transformations. And that's the right way to conceptualize yourself, is you're the thing that maintains constancy across transformation.
It's interesting. His last movie was very much whistleblowing, awake, aware, this, that. A lot of people were like, whoa, he's like, he should run for politics. And he's like, politics suck, blah, blah, blah. He's like coming out about all this stuff. But then it seemed like a lot of people were saying that were his fans were like, whoa, he did recently a weird switch, just recently, like Dave Chappelle did, where he was talking about against the industry and then all of a sudden switched and went right back to it and went on tour and accepted the deal, you know. And
he went into sort of hiding for a bit. I don't know if he got some kind of a warning or they said, right, you need to shut your mouth.
Exactly.
Something happened.
Yes, he was telling a lot of truth. If you see his last movie, you guys will enjoy it a lot. He's wearing a white suit, I think, in the picture. I think it's the one where he's wearing white slacks and a white blazer. It's not the Messiah Complex one. That one I did not like very much. And it's not the one where he's talking about drug addiction or homelessness. Those were two separate documentaries he did for Netflix. Yeah. But it's worth, you guys would both really love it, I think. Really a lot. It's really good.
I haven't watched it, not because I don't want, it's not a case of me not wanting to watch it. I just haven't got around to watching it yet. But
exactly.
My sister arranged it for me as a surprise. She knows that I really like it. She really likes it.
That's so awesome.
So she was like, oh, I've got this really cool surprise. And she was going to tell me like about a week before, but then she said, she told me about a month before. She said, I just couldn't keep it in. I have to say that
I would freak out and be like, I would be like a teen rapper if I went to go see that.
He was so good. He was absolutely hilarious. Absolutely, he was just brilliant.
I love him.
Really
I love
good.
him.
He was great.
The only
stand-up comedy, but you know, kind of delivered in a
truthing way, right?
It was like the Bill Hicks type scenario. You know, it was that type of thing, and
yeah, he's interesting. He's really interesting.
He was good. He was really good. I really enjoyed it.
This is how a being can change. There's a worm addicted to eating grape leaves. Suddenly, she wakes up. Call it grace. Whatever. Something wakes her, and she's no longer a worm. She's an entire vineyard. And the orchard too, the fruit, the trunks, a growing wisdom and joy. Doesn't need to devour.
Hey, Satori, I got to see yesterday and give him a gift and hang out and say hello for a second.
Oh, excellent!
That was really cool because I've been trying to make it happen for so long, and it's like we're in the same vicinity, but
it's so cool that you live so close by. It's brilliant.
Well, I would, living close by, I don't know if that's what you would call it so much as I don't have a home nearby. So I'm mobile and I'm constantly back and forth. So in between, I was telling them if you guys should have came to the beach house because that was so nice when we had a 3-story place. That was...
Oh, wow, that sounds amazing.
And it was on Shell Beach, which is out of the movie Dark City, which is why I was saying that somehow I found out Shell Beach is real, but it seemed kind of like a real illusion, just like in the movie where it's like real, but it's a real illusion too, It's really cool. So what's the, is this a hosting show? Are you guys hosting? What are you guys doing?
When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. When power narrows the area of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. When power leads man to ignorance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the area of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. poetry cleanses. When power leads man towards ignorance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the area of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses.
No, we're just hanging out, I guess, right?
This is kind of a hangout, and then if Dan wants to mix stuff in or create from this hangout, then that's you can, I guess. That's my to define it. That's kind of how I'm viewing it. I don't know. That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I didn't even sleep last night. I had the same situation with the environmental evasions, trying to I don't know, like be one with my environment, like a fly on the wall, without like actually being reactionary enough to where I like have to say something, but it's not acceptable. So you're just like, don't say anything. I've like mild Tourette's, which is funny.
No, don't. Just let the Tourette's flow.
I can't because
I have Tourette's too. Not swearing Tourette's,
but
just the honesty.
Yes, the true thing. The truth
Tourette's. Yeah.
I have the truth.
Yeah, I'm the same.
And I don't want to put anyone in a position, because it's not my place really to say it. And so I'm trying to be discreet, but to where he knows I've been on the
I think like the point
edge.
we've reached collectively, as a human species, if we can't, in 2017, in the age of information, allow ourselves to be who we are, then I don't know when it's going to happen. Do you know what I mean? So I would say, full scale, full speed ahead, treat Tourette's.
Oh, totally. I had a great comment prepared when I was woken up in 3 a.m. and kept up till noon. And I just was really nice about it, and I didn't say it because I knew it would be like mildly jarring for this person to hear a girl really take something it's like one of those things where you're woken up in the middle of the night by cries of ecstasy, only it's trash, right? You're like, wow, where's this coming from? So you're trying to figure out in your mind, you're dreaming, so I call it infiltration of like thought infiltration, because you're like half asleep, right?
They're thought waves. Thought waves that whatever you're aligned to.
Yeah.
So what brings you the most joy, what you resonate with, even if you let yourself, conversely, let yourself lapse into negativity or whatever the thought process is, you will align yourself with other vibratory thoughts or thought waves of a similar nature.
Well, I agree. It's really interesting
because kind of stuff going into your head, and you're thinking. In fact, sometimes you can be like, for example, walking through a supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
You're like suddenly getting these weird thoughts, and you're thinking, God, did I just think that? That's really awful. But I've just had that thought process or whatever. But you're constantly walking through this sea of thought waves and vibration that obviously you can't necessarily see, touch. Of thought waves and vibration that obviously you can't necessarily see, touch. Of thought waves and vibration that obviously you can't necessarily see, touch. Or hear or anything. It's just, so occasionally these thoughts come into our heads, and they're not necessarily your thoughts. They could just be thoughts that because of your thought processes as a general theme for that week, for example, depending on what you're doing, will influence what you connect with, what you align yourself with.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the streets, and nobody anywhere seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. Sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house
telepathic way, pick up on other thought waves that are floating through the sea of mind. If that makes sense.
Yes, and
So then
that's exactly what it felt like.
You're like, hang on a minute, that's totally against what I believe and what I feel. I would never have that thought.
Well,
and then you feel guilty about it.
I can tell you what you're saying is it's spot on, because when you hear moans while you're sleeping, you're half awake, they're like cries of ecstasy, but you know they're not really. And then you overhear parts of conversations, and you try not to laugh. You're somewhere in between dream, sleep, and you're like, this is not my reality, but it feels like it's infiltrating your reality, and you're trying to be like vigilant, I feel like, and aware, so that it doesn't become like consuming, because it's confusing to me and really reminds me of being younger as a child, hearing those similar things and knowing that there's just all this stuff around me going on. So it could be one or the other.
I'm a human being, God damn it! My life has value!
And it's interesting how they sound similar. You know, someone could be crying out of passion or ecstasy, you never really know. And then you fall back asleep or something, and you hear it again, and you're like, well, what was that? But so that in itself, I think, is something that I prefer to avoid. And in fact, I just was like, I'm just gonna get up and play music and just be awake right now. Like, it was my way of dealing with it. And unfortunately for D, he was like not able to drown out the annoyance and be non-reactionary. But instead of saying what I was gonna say, which after overhearing someone say they weren't raped properly, you know, as a girl who's a survivor, my mind wanders, and I really wanted to say in the morning after I saw these women face to face, I would say, okay, who's the one, well, really casually, right? Like, so who's the one that didn't get raped good enough? You? Okay, you? Yes, please go get fucked properly first. I would like to say that foremost. But instead of saying that, I just said, wow, you guys are super loud, you're always so loud. And they were so embarrassed, and I was just thinking, when someone acts that way and then says, oh, maybe that's just part of our personality, and you're like, yeah, no, it's just rude. You know, you just kind of like, you're just smiling and you're trying to be, you know, diplomatic about it. So instead of saying what I was going to say about it, which would have been my sense of humor, but nobody would have got it. It was really off the cuff humor, like, yeah, who's the one that was complaining she didn't get raped, you know, well enough in the middle of the night and keeping me up for so long? You? Okay, you, yeah, go get fucked. Because I thought it was funny. And the thing is that's the dark city, like the humor I find around me in just what other people I think would perceive as really a dark reality. I actually have to laugh at and be like, I can to transmute that into something funny.
Yeah, that's the luminous dark.
There you go. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Where the darkness, this shimmers just right. You're like, okay, I see what's going on.
Yeah, I'm the same in that respect. I tend to laugh at things that most people would perceive as very dark. And it's not that I'm evil or negative in any way, shape or form, but I can kind of see it in a different light. That makes the luminous dark again. I can see it in a different way. It actually reminds me of something. Talking of supermarkets, I remember standing in a supermarket with quite a enlightened friend that I have, with Miles. We were standing in this queue, and we were totally connected, but we were doing stuff, so we were still a bit off our heads. So obviously we were in a different state of awareness to everybody else. And I started to really focus on the conveyor belt and the food moving along it. And for some reason, I found this hilarious. I found it the most hilarious thing. And I didn't have to say anything. We were standing next to each other, so we weren't actually looking at each other. So he couldn't see me laughing, or he couldn't see my facial expression. And then he started to laugh. And when we left the supermarket, we were talking about how hilarious and hysterical the whole third dimensional scenario of like standing in this queue and watching your food slowly move along this conveyor belt. Just how weird it was, and that the fact that people weren't even aware of how weird that was. That was the thing that we were finding funny, is that nobody was aware of how kind of ridiculous that was. If that makes sense. You found that really funny. I mean, that's not really.
Oh, I would find that funny.
A dark example, but
things like that do trigger a sense of what I would call or describe as detachment and a form of disassociation, and even dissonance. That becomes like an environmental thing where everyone around you can feel it. But when you see food moving on a conveyor belt, I think it's pretty removed from nature, don't you? It feels like it would trigger that response. I think I'm sensitive that way. In fact, I remember driving in New York City and not really having anxiety until this one night where it was raining and the glare of the lights on the windows triggered a strange kind of detachment, where I felt alienated by even the electricity itself. It was like yelling at me. Like I could feel the electricity. It was really hard to describe.
No, yeah, like I felt the same way too the first time I went to New York. Like New York's cool and everything, but like after a day of just seeing nothing but concrete, I was like, oh my god, I'm getting kind of like claustrophobic and feeling weird. Get out of here.
I went to New York in 2004 with a couple of friends. We just stayed there we went there for a week. And I remember we were driving through, we weren't driving, we were in a taxi, but we were driving through, it's just like when you see it in the movies, it's kind of like, it all looks really glamorous and great, but like when you're driving through it, it's just like a sea of buildings that are really tall, sort of narrow roads and everything. But when we were walking around and having these experiences, my two friends were getting a bit kind of starstruck by things, like when we went to see the Empire State Building. And
I was going to say the buildings.
I felt like New York, to me, felt like a massive, it didn't feel real. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel real at all. And I told my friends, and they said, well, that's because you're influenced by the fact you've watched all these films over the years, and it's always associated with Hollywood and movies. I said, no, it's not. It's more than that. There's an energy. There's this weird vibration in New York. It doesn't feel real to me.
That's
it felt
what
like
I
was
felt
walking around Disney World. That's what it felt like. And I've been to Disney. I went there when I was 15 with my family. Like that. There was some kind of unnatural feeling about it. I can't explain it.
Really awakening to the dreamlike nature of our reality. Really awakening to the dreamlike nature of our reality. Really awakening to the dreamlike nature of our reality. What is really going on with regards to our humanity or lack thereof, and specifically focusing on understanding the suffering that we are seeing in the world, the insanity really that is playing out right before us. What can we do, most importantly, about it? Okay, so what is going on Earth with us as humans? Okay, so what is going on Earth with us as humans? Okay, so what is going on Earth with us as humans?
We are in the middle of a collective psychosis of epic proportions, and it's so pervasive that it's not even that much of a part of our planetary conversation. And that's an expression of the depth of the madness that has overtaken our species. And it's nothing new. I'm just a translator for, so many of these traditions, spiritual traditions are saying this. Just as a modern person, I'm translating it into a psychological sort of metaphor or idiom. the origin, the source of the madness that's playing out in our world through the greater body politic is the psyche. It's so unbelievably obvious, but yet from the consensus reality point of view, what I'm saying just seems like so out there and so radical. What I'm saying just seems like so out there and so radical. What I'm saying just seems like so out there and so radical. But it's so, it's just so clear. So what I'm basically saying is that there's an actual disease in the collective unconscious, but encoded in this disease, it's actually medicine. It's actually helping us to wake up. But encoded in this disease, it's actually medicine. It's actually helping us to wake up. But encoded in this disease, it's actually medicine. It's actually helping us to wake up. But it's a quantum phenomenon. And what I mean by quantum, they can, like, what is the nature, like, they can be like a wave or a particle, like with light. It can be both, and how it'll manifest depends on, well, how do we interact with it? How do we observe it? The same thing with this disease, and the indigenous Native American people, they talk about, they have a name for it, Watiko. They talk about it as being this cannibalistic spirit that just consumes and takes without giving anything back. And they have all these metaphors for it. It's like this parasite of the mind, it's this virus of the psyche. It's not just metaphor in the sense that we have, we understand in the physical realm that there are these viruses, and this is a psychic virus, and it operates through our unconscious, through the blind spots, in such a way that we then become the instrument to act this virus out in the world. So we act out our unconscious in a way, so we become the conduit through which this, you can think of it as a higher dimensional entity, but it's not actually, it doesn't even exist. You see, we might experience it subjectively as an entity. That's our experience of it. But like I point out in the book, it ultimately doesn't even have any intrinsic objective existence at all, separate from our mind. And yet, here's this thing that doesn't even exist whatsoever, and it can destroy our species. And that's the paradox. And the thing about this virus, it operates, like I was saying, through the unconscious blind spot in such a way that it works through the projective tendencies of our mind, because we're always projecting. That's one of the ways of describing when people, say, this is like a dream-like nature. Well, yeah, just like a dream is an ink blot, and whatever we project onto the ink blot, instantaneously, the ink blot shapeshifts and reflects back our projection, because it's not something separate out there. And it happens, in an instant. It doesn't even take a half of a second. It happens in no time. And then we become entranced by our own projections in such a way that we then think what we're perceiving objectively exists separate from us. So then we react to our projections. And that, in a sense, that's really the process underlying and informing the Watiko virus. It's a form of because it operates through the blind spot, it's a form of blindness, of psychic blindness, but it's a particular form of blindness in that we actually think we're really clearly seeing. And not only do we think we're clearly seeing, we actually, in an arrogant way, think that we're seeing more clearly than people who actually are clear-sighted. And so what it does is that it's a source of madness in ourselves, but then the fact that everybody is suffering from it, we don't recognize our madness. We don't recognize our madness. We don't recognize our madness. It's an inner disease of the soul, and yet it explicates itself. It actually expresses itself via the medium of the outside world. So that's an amazing statement. And what I'm pointing at is that somehow there's something in the psyche that actually is able to extend itself out into the world and configure events in the seemingly outer world so as to synchronistically express what's going on inside of us. And that's always happening, But with most of us, we don't recognize that. And then, like I was saying, we become conditioned by our projections in a way we become entranced as if we're hypnotizing ourselves. And that's just a very simple description of how Wetiko works.
That it has the power to induce a negative hallucination. And, many of us understand what a normal hallucination is, seeing something that isn't there. Can you help us understand this from the negative hallucination to really emphasize that?
Right, and that phrase, the negative hallucination, the sci-fi writer Philip K. Dick, he was the one who coined that phrase. And I just want to say, because I just wrote this recent article about Philip K. Dick's work, he was completely describing to a T Wetiko, but he of course was describing it in his own way. And so what he means by when we have like an actual hallucination, we're seeing something that's not there. Well, a negative hallucination is that something is there and we can't see it. And we can't see it. And we can't see it. It works through the blind spot. It's like this blindness. Stuff is playing out that people who are actually seeing, there's like this incredible shadow or there's abuse and it's really obvious. It might be obvious to you and me, but then there are other people who you pointed out to, like say in a family system, if there's abuse. And, or with Donald Trump being a perfect example. You point out, oh my God, he's so sexist and racist and misogynist and on and on and on. But then there are people who just don't see it. They just somehow cannot recognize what to you and I couldn't be more obvious, that would be an example of a negative hallucination.
Yeah, and this is part of what makes this, phenomenon just really actually dangerous, because in an effort to perhaps awaken or help people step out of their own self-destruction, they're not only unable to see it, but they're also resistant to the efforts of others, perhaps, or any, efforts of help or healing whatsoever. And, speaking of resistance, something that I think we can bring up right at the start here, because it plays such a big role, is that while some people are deeply asleep and that carries with it all sorts of things, but many are awakening, but in their awakening, they are trying to deal with the insanity of the world in ways that are actually not conducive, but actually fueling the Wetiko itself.
Because the thing about Wetiko, it actually will inspire us to act out in ways that don't serve us, that are actually, contrary to our best interest. And so that's just really interesting. I just wanted to say that because I think we can all have the recognition that, like when we're acting out our addictions or our habitual patterns, we know they're not serving us, but we do it anyway. So that would be an example of that. The thing about Wetiko, by operating through the blind spots, it operates through the part of us that actually reacts to our projection. So when we see Wetiko, say if we see the evil playing outside of ourselves, which, it's all around us, and if we react to it from an unconscious place with the best of intentions, with like this self-righteousness of, I want to, I'm on the side of justice and I want to help and I want to bring world peace and I'm a political activist really wanting to, be compassionate. But if we're reacting out of our unconsciousness, we're actually unwittingly, even with the best of intentions, feeding Wetiko, because Wetiko, it feeds off of polarization, okay? So that's why some of the best people I know, they're spiritually, very, very interested in spirituality. They're political activists with the best of intentions, but they're unwittingly serving as a vector to actually feed the disease that they're fighting against. And so that's one of the ways that Wetiko then, because it actually is contagious and it'll propagate itself in a non-local way through the field via people's unconscious reactions to it.
Deception on a personal and a collective scale that Wetiko carries. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, totally. Well, in other traditions, they'll have, they'll give these names to Wetiko, and they'll say, these are like a master of deception. That's what these entities are. So, because if you think about it, we ourselves are like these geniuses at deceiving ourselves. And one way of understanding that, because we all do it at certain points in our lives, but, we can tell a lie and we can start to believe our own lie to the point where we don't even know we're lying. And then we're in denial, and we're in denial that we're in denial, and it becomes a feedback loop. And we can't see it, because if we see that we're doing that, it would blow our whole gig of being in denial. So then it becomes like an autonomous self-generating process of deceiving ourselves. And if I'm deceiving ourselves, and if I've told myself a lie and I believe my own lie, there's a certain charisma I have that's very convincing to other people. So that will easily entrance other people to like actually fall under my spell and to have an agreement with me. And you see, the thing about Wetiko, it can absolutely affect an individual person, but it's a mistake to just think of it as a pathology that, oh, that person has and I don't, or other people, we don't and they do, because it's a collective psychosis. And it's important to understand that the evil of Wetiko, it works through the collective process, through a group, through a species, through a nation. So that's the way that it will actually propagate itself. And so that's kind of why it's important. Yeah, any one of us at any moment can get taken over by it and can actually, in a sense, embody the disease. But if we see a person in that state, and if we think, oh, well, they have Wetiko and I don't, well, Wetiko, if you remember, I said it feeds off of polarization, it feeds off of separation. So the idea being, if you see somebody who's embodying Wetiko, if you have the understanding, oh, and they're a dream character. Dream character is in a dream. Any character in a dream is an aspect of ourselves. If they're a dream character, they're actually an embodied reflection of that sick part of me. Then all of a sudden you've cut through the separation and you're actually engendering compassion. And compassion is really the energy that really dispels Wetiko.
It's interesting.
That's where like Dark City comes in the movie. It feels
Totally.
like that.
Oh my God,
like
it's
a
almost
dream,
like an
like
Inception where
a
it's
different
changing.
dimension world.
Totally.
You ever had those dreams where you like, hey, am I awake or am I dreaming? Am I awake or am I dreaming? Am I awake or am I dreaming? But it feels real, but everything's slightly off. You're like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, it was weird.
I would say the majority of my dreams are like that, where I'm not sure if I'm awake or asleep, and I think that might be some of the PTSD a little bit. But it's interesting because there are times where I feel it's a tool, because you get used to it, so you just say, okay, I'm not going to ever rely on being, when I'm awake, even fully awake, or so it's like I think it tricks me into being aware in some ways of other times where most people are sleepwalking, if that makes sense. But what's interesting is that feeling you described about New York City, I had when I walked the streets of DC. I felt like I was walking the Monopoly game, and it freaked me out.
Yeah, that's a really
the same
good way
feeling.
to describe it.